This is a critical video targeting Alm, one of the two protagonists in Fire Emblem Shadows of Valentia, a Nintendo 3DS game. This video is basically an audio essay. There are 3 infographics. Spoiler warning, if you don't want plot points in Shadows of Valentia to be spoiled, this video is not for you. Declaration of bias and intent. I absolutely love video games. They are my favorite entertainment media. Alm's the first and so far only character I have found so fundamentally and wholly detestable that I have quit a game. I am predisposed to dislike characters like Alm, the societally acceptable, self-appointed, self-aggrandizing, idealistic, and rapidly social agitator that dons the title hero. I myself am like Berkut, the character tailor-made to oppose Valentia's quote-unquote hero, right down to romantic preferences. Even if Alm were intelligently and fairly written, it is unlikely my opinion would be fundamentally different. While I may exaggerate the degree to which Alm is pandered to by Shadow of Valentia's structure, because of personal values, his character is a key, grievous, structural weakness within an excellent game. My criticism of Alm, and to a lesser degree Celica, will be supplemented by Myers-Briggs' psychological typology to describe them in greater detail to facilitate analysis. The arguments will assume Alm is as follows. He is extroverted, people-oriented, as opposed to introverted. Alm is focused on the larger picture as opposed to a narrow, detail-oriented mentality. His judgments are predicated largely on feelings as opposed to logic. He disregards rules, established structures, and traditions in pursuit of personal desire, as opposed to abiding by those same pre-existing structures. Celica shares his preferences, except that she is private and reserved. She's an introvert. Alm is an ENFP, an extroverted, intuitive, feeling perceiver, and I will criticize him as an unhealthy example of that personality preference pattern. Celica shares this pattern, but is, as stated before, an introvert. I also assume that Berkut, like myself, is an introverted sensor thinker judger, a people-averse, impulsive, data-oriented, rigid rule follower. As he has flaws, I believe Berkut's identity is much easier to pinpoint. Any and all preferences, no matter how strong or weak, for any side of the 4 mutually exclusive pairs of qualities in Myers-Briggs are valid. The goal of this essay is to establish that Alm is spared from any possible development due to the way his love interest Celica, his mentor the Knight Sir Bison, main antagonist Berkut, inner circle of friends, and plot are structured. There is one final comparative section before the end for the sake of context. My statements are meant narrowly and do not constitute any criticism of any personality as a whole. The love between Alm and Celica comprises what I believe to be the heart of Shadows of Valentia. The problem is that they made the mentalities almost identical. Both Celica and Alm share the ENFP abbreviation. This means that they share the same core characteristics but place their priorities differently. Note that the bottom and top 2 preferences are flipped. Alm and Celica have identical strengths and weaknesses with different emphases. So Alm likes dreaming the most, Celica likes feelings the most, Alm likes sensing the least, Celica likes thinking the least. But the top 2 of hers and the bottom 2 of his and hers are the same. Without going into too much depth, they also share the same mechanics. There's 2 feeling, dreaming, thinking, and sensing functions according to Myers-Briggs, and these 2 use the same toolbox in the same way. They just prefer different tools over the others. But the ones that work for them are the same, and the ones that don't work for them are the same. Sharing the NFP abbreviation also means they both prefer to dream, emotionally process reality, and break rules, as stated in the opening. Sharing so many qualities means that it is extremely unlikely either Alm or Celica will develop because of their relationship. The fact that they grew up until about 12 in the same village reduces that possibility to an unpleasantly small non-zero figure, in my opinion. I am sure it is possible to create a romance between 2 basically identical people. That could require some combination of a comedy of errors where neither one gets that the other is so similar, and they're both kind of working through personal feelings and baggage. And kind of this weird rom-com companionship. mechanic. Or B, a completely different set of interests and backstories. So two hyper-competitive people who one loves esports, the other loves real sports. One is a brawler who's extremely committed to that. One is a mage. One is an honor roll student. The other is a custom car shop owner. Two different disciplines that each can learn from. And on screen, they learn from each other. Not that Alm and Celica are a fighter and a mage, but they don't learn from. Alm doesn't learn magic, and Celica doesn't learn how to fight people because of their relationship. Another possibility is to openly and obviously state why each likes the other outside of their mutual childhood fascination. This desire should not be based in how similar they are. Each needs to love something in the other they lack within themselves. So that we avoid looking like each is in love with a physical reflection of themselves. Alm could love Celica's spirituality or purity. I honestly can't see anything of value in Alm. I assume there's something. If it's not there, they need a moment where she discovers the actual reason she loves him, or the writers need to engineer a moment for Alm to display some hidden talent Celica finds alluring. I'm sure there are people who can envision other possibilities to modify how these two work in order to make things between them work. Celica and Alm aren't different in any meaningful way. They are more or less dating themselves. I cannot help but see unabashed narcissism in this. Alm's mentor relationship is similarly wasted. Alm is specifically instructed to go nowhere because he is not ready. Sir Myson, his mentor, leaves on what is effectively a business trip. Alm goes off anyway when a recruiter comes by to seek Sir Myson. Alm is recruited into the army, and within most 2 weeks, he's proclaimed figurehead, leader, the poster boy. I believe the in-universe justification for this is that as the adoptive son of Sir Myson, the war hero, there's some reason that the populace will follow him unquestioningly. I can't see this happening. I mean, you're no soldier's just going to follow you because your daddy was famous. Alm, as far as I can tell, doesn't pay for any mistake, or specifically leaving the village early. Alm's relationship with Berkut is designed to avoid developing Alm. It's easiest to reduce the matter to 2 questions with 4 bullet points each. If we go down the list, and the list is right there. Is Berkut praised for being an introvert, so he's more loyal, especially to people he values, so basically in this, it's Renea only. Introspective, deliberative, focused. No, Berkut's insulated lifestyle and mentality are depicted to be one of his many weaknesses. Is Berkut praised for being a sensor, so he's more physically, spatially, and or organizationally aware. He's more in touch with his 5 senses. Nope. Alm is shown to be the better fighter, tactician, and commander. Is Berkut praised for being a thinker, so he's more logical, better at impartially processing data, maybe better at a logically intensive field, so maybe math? No. Alm is shown to be more objective and intelligent, while Berkut's sanity and Renea undergo spontaneous combustion. Is Berkut praised for being a judger, so he's more principled, regimented, purposeful, honest, more of a stick in the mud? Nope. Berkut's rigidity is all but stated to be his greatest weakness. Is Alm derided for being an extrovert, so he's more concerned about his friends and society and the outside world above all else? Nope. He's told that the solution to his friends being unhappy is to devote himself further to them. He is also called to deepen his involvement in society at large to solve monolithic problems. Another possibility for him being criticized as an extrovert is for him to neglect his own personal failings in pursuit of the outside. He doesn't do that either. Is Alm derided for being an intuitive? So he's too focused on broad ideas, or overwhelmed with logistics, the mundane, or fine details? Nope. Is Alm criticized for being a feeler? So he's too emotional, temperamental, egocentric? Nope. Is Alm criticized for being a perceiver, a rule breaker? Too much of an anarchist, chaotic mess, aimless, directionless? Nope. Alm's overambition for a better world is stated to be his only villainous trait. Sir Myson, his mentor, again, does utter lines critical of Alm's emotion and unruliness in the beginning. but Alm and the plot, who are basically the same, promptly ignore them. I am not seeking failings of the hero or successes of the villain to be constants. Just for there to be moments where the antagonist is, in some way, at some moment in the plot, superior to the hero as a human being. Sovereign, the villain behind the principal antagonist in Mass Effect 1, is a great example of a well-crafted antagonist. He's a thoroughly evil, extragalactic, sentient, synthetic life form who's intimidating and conniving. Only in the last hour of gameplay does Shepard even come close to outplaying him, and it's by a narrow margin. Sovereign's underling Saren, a conniving racist gradually mind-controlled by the entity, is the de facto antagonist for the player until they learn that the ship is actually pulling the strings. Additionally, Saren, so the minion, outwits Shepard and kills Shepard's would-be mentor, makes Shepard look like an idiot in front of galactic government, sneaks an army of androids past inept corporate security, and then tries to kill Shepard with those. And then we also learned that Saren, before he went crazy and was just, an annoying racist, made Shepard's actual mentor look like a complete idiot. Not only is Sovereign competent, but Saren, his puppet, is also very competent. Here's an example of Sovereign's, one of his memorable
Your words are as empty as your future.
There are countless great villains. Sovereign is one of them. Outside of comedies or children's shows, a plot is almost always better if the villain is at least on par with the hero. Berkut isn't treated with a properly dramatic or poignant tone. He is a straw man upon which the hero and writers can use beatsticks. Echoes lacks any other meaningful antagonists. Emperor Rudolph is a good obstacle, but he comes in late. Also, instead of leveraging his status as the hero's father, a la Darth Vader, Emperor Rudolph chooses to pull his punches when fighting Alm. This undermines both him as a villain and the dangers the situation posed. Personally, I don't think that the narrative hammers Rudolph's status as a villain home to any degree, and I don't really buy into him as a villain. I would have written him as a hero. He is Emperor Rudolph is intimidating rather than villainous. Chancellor Desai is more of a cartoon character. You're supposed to hate him. He does that job well, but he doesn't really have any depth besides he's hateable. The two serious antagonists have a man crush on the hero. This is the exact same silliness Fate's engaged in. We have an angsty villain, Takamir Berkut, and daddy villain, Emperor Rudolph, or Anankos. If you don't know about Fates, don't buy it. It's fine. Friendship, or in Alm's case, embezzlement. Alm's friends serve to use a polite term, stroke his ego. This is intended to benefit Alm, but is a fundamental perversion of character interrelation. This is a harem or gathering of lackeys. Take your pick. In page 57 of John Truby's book, The Anatomy of a Story, which I had read for an unrelated personal venture, the author states that this great mistake, making the hero the only worthwhile character, is exacerbated in script writing because of the huge emphasis placed on the high concept premise. In these stories, the hero seems to be the only person who matters. But ironically, this intense spotlight on the hero, instead of defining him more clearly, only makes him seem like a one-note marketing tool. To create great characters, think of all your characters as part of a web in which each helps define the others. To put it another way, a character is often defined by who he is not. End quote. The central cast of characters, with three notable exceptions of Alm, Celica, and Faye, do an excellent job of fleshing each other out. Alm is likely intended to fill the role of admirable hero king. There is no build-up or evidence of this status. Looking at his supports, we have Faye. The writing of her character is trash. She is no more than a small-minded, vindictive village girl with an obsession over Alm. This lack of nuance is almost to the point of parody. She's straight out of Monty Python. I am going to ignore her supports and will continue to pity her character. Claire just wants to sleep with Alm for no apparent reason. She's graceful about it. Props to Claire for a class act under authorial pressure. Myson's support has two versions, almost a decade apart. The first is child and grandfather. It's wonderfully heartfelt and conveys a depth to Myson's character. The second is a decent conflict of interest when the two are older, and Alm feels deceived. Myson is just generically supportive, and Alm is being passive-aggressive because he wasn't told his father is an authoritarian, kind of evil emperor. And then Myson starts parroting the "you were meant for greatness" drivel Heaven forbid we criticize a short-sighted child. We have officially retconned any consequences for Alm leaving the village. None of these conversations develop Alm. He cannot see the feelings of those around him, even though he's supposed to be a gifted military leader whose talent lies in emotionally manipulating others into actions he cannot possibly do himself. Incriminatingly, Alm's only supports with people his age are with girls who want to sleep with him. If we go a little deeper and break down his inner circle, Gray is basically second in charge of the village mob. He's an extremely likable alpha male and close to Tobin above all others. Tobin and Gray blindly support Alm, but Gray has a life. If Gray's an ESTP, as I suspect, that would mean Alm and Gray would be very much inclined to heated debates and shouting matches, even in the best of times, because they are fundamentally different people who cannot see each other's point of view. In reality, someone like Gray would be the person least likely to enjoy being around Alm, and individuals like Berkut and myself included. In-game, he's Alm's fourth greatest fanboy. He's behind Tobin and the three girls who want to sleep with Alm. Cliff does his own thing and is his own man. Like with Lucas, another character, they missed out on a great opportunity to have someone call Alm out on his BS. With Faye, I have nothing new to state. She deserves better. There's really no reason behind her attraction to Alm. I believe her infatuation because it fits my admittedly subjective view of love as selfless, giving, generous, positive, and willing to suffer. I can believe she would walk through hell for Alm. I cannot say the same about Celica. It seems Celica wants to stand on a moral high horse and be given love, rather than actually earning anything. I'm sure I'm in the minority here. I'm on to Alm's other biggest fan. Tobin just seems like a bland fanboy, has no life. Again, this fate isn't really deserved. Unlike Faye, I hate him, so I'm not too bothered. Lucas should have been Alm's relationship coach. He is the only other person engaged. Both characters can learn from each other. Lucas can embrace his feelings more. Alm can be less of a narcissistic a-hole. As stated with Cliff, Lucas was a golden opportunity to have someone coach Alm through some facet of life. Claire is a good character. As with everyone, her relationship with Alm needed context. There's absolutely no reason for her attraction to Alm. Anyone else from Alm's inner circle would be more believable for her to latch onto. Bowie is a good contrast. This is what they go for. Cliff is really smart and would impress her. Tobin is a doormat and would be unquestioningly supportive. Lucas could have had an affair with her that blossoms into true love, and we can have some morally gray melodrama and see side characters dealing with a difficult situation. Lucas is also a real knight. Claire seems fascinated with the concept of chivalry, damsel in distress, real knights, the fairy tale stuff. Alm is the charismatic run-of-the-mill dork who leads an army because reasons. There is nothing there. It's just more ego-stroking for Alm. Were I to make a recommendation, Claire should have fell for one man other than Alm and then reconsidered halfway through the plot, married someone else. Last point in this section. This is more of a thought experiment to show how Alm lacks people to call him out, or to provide context. According to some people in Myers-Briggs psychology, the best constructive relationship is a near opposite that shares the key failing. So in Alm's case, this is a complete lack of sensory attunement. And also the ideal counterweight communicates in the same manner. So they share the same sensor or intuitive preference. This isn't necessarily true. I personally don't buy into it, but I'm just going to use this as a possibility. Just look into it and see how the people who are perfectly suited to counter Alm, according to psychology, and how those people exist in the game. So we have ENTPs. There's only Python in the game. INTJs, there's Cliff, Lucas, and Dean, and possibly Sonia. I'm unsure of her exact character traits. And then INFJs like Celica's brother. The above list of people best equipped to deal with Alm, and yet still offer enough perspective, different viewpoints on stuff. Note that none of these characters have the standing or opportunity to call Alm out. Python is plot relevant for about 30 seconds, and he's the doorman for the resistance. Cliff and Lucas are extremely antisocial and don't interact well with others. They are only relevant during the prologue section. Dean and Sonia have no meaningful interaction with the plot, because then there would have to be two versions, because they're mutually exclusive. Celica's brother doesn't appear until late, and is integral to Celica only. I love every one of these characters except Dean and Celica's brother. Just to be clear, I'm assessing their roles in relation to Alm, or the plot, whatever, interchangeable. I'm not assessing their characters. Alm is blindly admired by pretty much everyone for no apparent reason. He's simply successful. This evidently feeds Berkut's hate and eventual insanity, Clarenfay's affections, his friend's admiration, and his position within Deliverance, the army he runs. I cannot help but feel this is getting worse the deeper I peer. Alm is seemingly well-liked because he hasn't failed yet. I cannot imagine anyone aside from vapid sheep following a man whose sole justification is charisma and results. I realize this is realistic. I don't believe the goal is to make Alm a scummy politician you could imagine seeing in real life on the TV. Oops. The plot, Alm's best friend. The plot themes are designed to serve Alm, but he isn't beholden to those same roles. Below is a list of possible core themes in Shadows of Valentia. Belief versus ambition, freedom versus fate, tyranny versus benevolence, the pension established systems have to rot. All of these conflicts are easy to perceive and lend themselves to one-sided conclusions. Ambition is something to embrace warily, belief fuels one's life, free will is always better than a life on unseen strings, benevolence is good, tyranny is bad, and the last point is basically decay exists. That's a self-evident thought experiment. Alm sides firmly with ambition, freedom, and extols the virtues of benevolent government, and seems to dislike the monarchical systems at hand. To his credit, he does recognize the value of faith, and this is seemingly part of his reconciliation with Celica. Though he does talk to and contribute to the death of each god personally, so I find it hard to believe his actions. It doesn't really jive well. And I find it hard to believe his actions during the story climax are at any level driven by anything other than his ego. At some point during the plot, we discover Alm has been appointed by the gods Mila and Duma to be savior of the land, alongside, coincidentally, his love Celica, who happens to be the heir to the Southern Empire, and Alm is the heir to the Northern Empire. In other words, everything has occurred as the gods willed it. This is ironically similar to Berkut's summarized low-effort villain philosophy that the nobility are inherently above the poor because nobles are born into resources. There is one important difference here. Berkut's assertion indirectly acknowledges nothing makes him inherently better than any other poor person. He just was coincidentally born into resources. Alm, along with Celica, have been declared by the gods to be above everyone else. This is, of course, in no way author bias. Alm, by the will of the gods, just like all other in-universe royalty before him, is appointed leader of the land. This does come to an end at some point in the next 2,000 years. So in Awakening, Fire Emblem, a different game, an authoritarian state runs Valentia, the western landmass. This Fire Emblem continuity, there's at least 4, is largely focused on the other continent, the other landmass. Both Princes Marth and Crom, featured in separate games, are a continuation of Alm's legacy. They both wield the falchion, an embodiment of both Fire Emblem and in-universe the original hero King Alm. Marth eventually comes to rule a kingdom in a continent to the east, the other large landmass. His dynasty is continued by Crom thousands of years later. These systems that Alm establishes and Marth establishes don't rot to any great degree. There are no degenerate kings leading dark and depraved lives. Even the pseudo-fascists in charge of Valentia in Awakening are implied to be led by a visionary who wants to kill a slowly waking dark god. In the epilogue, Alm and Celica's legend is stated to be passed to countless generations, presumably to be admired as some sort of tale of heroism. This point is, I was going to put this in a plot, but it kind of didn't fit, so I just wanted something to, this is a side point. Alm is supposed to develop. He does not, aside from physical prowess and societal status. He learns to have faith after his girlfriend is saved by and he helps kill another of the 2 existing gods. He learns to have a relationship with his childhood crush after they both admit to being wrong and resolve to chase their dreams and love together. He learns to be a better warrior during the quest that began with the approximate quote of, "You are not ready, be good while I'm on a business trip." Alm properly makes mincemeat of hundreds of mooks and never sees any consequences. Even considering maximum possible losses to the Deliverance Army, the force Alm commands, there is still very little he loses. Alm learns to manage his ambition. This point requires going back to his personality quirks. The flaw is an abject contradiction of who he is. He and almost all his friends are abjectly unambitious people. Claire, her twin Matilda, Camus, May, her cuter twin Dorothea, Cliff, Lucas, and the mercenaries are exceptions. Furthermore, Alm longs for the easiest possible romantic partner, Celica, who is even more detached from reality than he is. Alm is a easygoing, charismatic ideas man. Too ambitious is not a applicable flaw for him. An equivalent would be myself or Recruit writing fan fiction and making our self-insert avatar too illogical or too emotional. This farcical flaw is a justification for personal preference. It's not an endemic personal shortcoming. Alm is wholly static. The only feature in his personality that changes are his escalatingly grandiose roles, status, and reputation within society, and how they justify his giant ego. For perspective's sake, here's my subjective view of Fire Emblem protagonists, just to establish what I'm finding lacking in Alm. I have not played any Fire Emblem entry aside from the 3DS trio, but I've researched extensively into genealogy of the Holy War and watched several long-form analytical videos on Hector, Saga, and the Sacred Stones. I will be skipping characters in Mars Saga and Thracia 776. I will also be skipping Roy and Salif. This is a contextual statement to showcase better characters than Alm and state how they are better. So we have great Fire Emblem Lords. Again, this is my opinion. And this is from a story building perspective. This isn't who I like the best. Hector struggles with his emotions and has a clear arc. Sigurd is a selfless man in a terrible, terrible world. Eliwood is more or less the same as Sigurd, but he's just less trigger happy and he gets screwed over less consistently. So Sigurd is a tragedy. Eliwood is sort of the same, but it's also showing the value his idealism has. And then we have good characters, so that's just Lyn. Lyn contrasts well with Eliwood and Hector. Aside from this primary justification, her involvement in the tutorial makes it seem less like a tutorial. It kind of pretends that it's some sort of prologue. There seems to be a weirdly wifey moments for her that kind of seem thrown in there, but I'm going to disregard that. She's a good character. Just some weird stuff. And then we have the above average lords, Xander and Ike. Ike is a flat character with a really great concept. He's not nobility. He isn't nobility, unlike every other main character. He has a great sword. He commands a mercenary company. He's an egalitarian in a racist continent. He's cool. He's just a bit flat. Xander has fantastic supports, but Fate's writing in the story is complete and utter trash. These are my two favorite Lord characters. I don't believe I can defend them empirically. Pardon me if this is a little biased. And then we have the bad characters, the below average. Celica and Erica are kind of the same. Someone tried to write a sweet idealistic girl. You can dig into the characters, but there's very little to dig into. Ephraim's okay. He's integrated into the plot via Lion, his antagonist. This clear relationship really props him up, and working the antagonist and the hero in together is great. The archetypes, these characters fit neatly into archetypes. The sweet girl and the jock it's easy to grasp. It's easy to figure out. It's easy to see the motivations and how that plays out. These would be good player characters if they were transplanted into another game and another franchise. And then we have worse than bad, whatever you want to term that. We have Chrom and Ryoma. Ryoma is kind of bland, vanilla, perfect, and Chrom is bland, vanilla, perfect, but Lisa states he has flaws. So at least there's some depth there, even if it's in millimeters. Lisa, Crumb's sister, mentions that he has a tendency to break things when he's angry. This has no plot relevance, but it's something. And then we have the bad fanfiction characters. Um, Obviously, there's good fanfiction, but that's a different point. Um, these are basically just characters. We've got Corin, who was a gimmick. There was a cool gimmick, but it was done badly. And then Alm just is kind of like Corin, but has better prose. My point here is that aside from Corin, there is something unique and worth emulating in every other protagonist in the series. Even Corin had the unique concept in the torn between worlds shtick. It was handled with unspeakable ineptitude, but the concept was interesting. There is the possible defense that Alm is supposed to be some sort of OP character that can nullify pretty much any obstacle. Like Sigurd. Sigurd does this great, and so does Hector. There are many examples of high-level or relatively overpowered characters that work. In Overlord, the show I'm watching through, it's some MMO player gets transplanted with his NPC guild hall residents that are basically all at max level into some fantasy world that they have no clue of how they got there. They're all generally competent. They all are generally smart. And even those without specifically mentioned personality flaws, which most of them have it, they make incorrect logical leaps. They'll be told one piece of information and then they'll act on it, and it'll turn out that that piece of information was meaning something else. You can make it even a demigod relatable if you let them fail. Alm makes no mistakes save for his asinine treatment of Celica, his closest friends, and Mycen. And even these mistakes are portrayed more as unintended missteps, where no one is really to blame because it all works out in the end. Celica isn't spared from reality in the same way. Bowie, May, Delthea, and Saber all provide meaningful, competent characters who don't view things like Celica does. She may not be challenged necessarily, but she is at least contrasted. She also makes some blatantly illogical decisions later in the plot. It's probably bad writing, but I'm not going to not give credit. Celica is used by evil to attack Alm. Mila saves Celica. This is great. Celica is rewarded for her piety, and she now owes her life to someone else. Erica and Celica are the two INFP main characters in Fire Emblem and make similarly dubious decisions based on their own suppositions late into the plot. It's bad writing, but at least there are mistakes being made, and they pay for them, and it's rooted in a key character flaw. They don't think things through. They're not objective. This last part is more to provide circumstantial evidence that Alm was treated with unreasonable reverence, and to a much lesser degree, to be fair to Celica. And that was it. I originally went into researching Alm with the assumption that I would learn of his redeeming qualities, and be proven wrong or otherwise biased. I hate him exponentially more than when I first started looking into his character. Berkut's hatred of Alm resonates with me on a deeply personal level. At the same time, I find his descent into irrationality and sacrifice of Renea deeply dissatisfactory. Alm is an aggressively static character structured to avoid development. Due to the sheer blatancy of this lack of structure, I cannot help but to suppose at least one influential individual within Shadow of Valentia's writing team made a conscious decision to validate their identity, or whatever perfect version of their identity that Alm represents. Conversely, I believe Shadows of Valentia knocked it out of the park with the supporting cast, except the fanboy characters Ferdinand and Tobin. Alm's character comprises the one notable black mark in an otherwise wonderfully enjoyable entry in the Fire Emblem turn-based tactics series. Thank you sincerely for your time. Thank you, Mick Gordon. Rip and Tear is so far my most reliable method to cope with Alm. A general thank you to ZerkMonsterHunter, Pavise Productions, GhastStation, and Mekkah for facilitating my knowledge of the franchise outside of Awakening and Fates. Lastly, and most importantly, thank you, Frederick, for the edits and the book recommendation. Thank you, Christina, for the proofreading. Thank you, Gabrielle, for the support. And that is it.